I watched my boss's daughter march into the office like she owned the place, which, technically, she was about to, and fire me with the same casual indifference someone uses to order coffee. But what she didn't know was that I'd already discovered her $2.3 million embezzlement scheme, and her biggest mistake wasn't stealing from the company. It was firing the one person who could prove it. My name is Michael Torres, and I've been the head of marketing at Westfield Industries for 12 years when Jessica Westfield decided to destroy my career on a Tuesday afternoon. She walked into what used to be her father's office wearing a power suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her blonde hair pulled back in a style that screamed expensive salon. Robert Westfield, the man who'd built this HVAC company from nothing, stood behind his own desk like a stranger in his own home. "Michael," Jessica said, not bothering to look up from her phone, "we're making some changes around here. Your position has been eliminated." I felt my stomach drop but kept my face neutral. 12 years of building their online presence from zero. 12 years of working weekends, answering calls during family dinners, creating the marketing campaigns that tripled their revenue. All dismissed with the same tone someone might use to cancel a dinner reservation. Robert finally met my eyes, and I saw something there I'd never seen before: defeat. His own daughter was dismantling everything he'd worked for, and he seemed powerless to stop it. "Jessica, maybe we should discuss this further," he said weakly. "Dad, we talked about this. The company needs fresh blood, new ideas. Michael's methods are outdated." She finally looked at me, her smile as cold as winter air. Nothing personal, just business. But it felt personal when she had security escort me to my desk. Personal when she watched me pack 12 years of my professional life into a cardboard box. Personal when she made sure every employee on the floor witnessed my walk of shame to the exit. 20 minutes later, I sat in my car in the parking lot, hands gripping the steering wheel. The box of my belongings sat on the passenger seat like evidence of a crime. My phone buzzed with messages from coworkers, some offering sympathy, others probably relieved it wasn't them facing unemployment. What Jessica didn't know was that her timing couldn't have been worse. 3 days earlier, while helping organize transition documents for her takeover, I'd stumbled across something in Robert's files that made my blood run cold. Financial records showing money disappearing from company accounts, transferred to shell companies I'd never heard of. At first, I thought it might be legitimate business expenses I wasn't aware of. But the amounts were staggering, hundreds of thousands of dollars moving to California-based consulting firms that seemed to exist only on paper. I'd quietly photographed everything, thinking I should bring it to Robert's attention when the timing was right. Now, sitting in my car with my career in ruins, those photos took on a completely different meaning. Jessica hadn't fired me because I was outdated. She'd fired me because I was dangerous. The next morning hit me like a slap of cold reality. No job to rush to, no meetings to attend, no campaigns to manage. I made coffee in my quiet kitchen and opened my laptop, staring at the photos I'd taken from Robert's files. In the harsh light of unemployment, the evidence looked even more damning. Transfer after transfer, always to the same 3 companies in Los Angeles. Companies that, according to my quick internet searches, had been incorporated just 8 months ago. My phone rang, disrupting my investigation. David Chun, Westfield's chief financial officer and the closest thing I had to a friend in management, sounded stressed. "Michael, I heard what happened yesterday. This is insane." "Thanks, David. I'm still processing it myself. Listen, can we meet for coffee? There's something I need to discuss with you, and it can't wait." An hour later, we sat in a corner booth at Murphy's Diner, the kind of place where truckers and office workers shared the same worn vinyl seats. David looked around nervously before leaning forward. "Jessica has called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow. She wants to sell the entire West Division." I nearly choked on my coffee. The West Division employs 300 people. I know. And get this, she's proposing to liquidate the equipment and sell the client contracts to a company in California. Guess who's listed as the primary contact for the purchasing company? My blood went cold. One of those consulting firms. David's eyes widened. "How did you know about those?" I pulled out my phone and showed him one of the photos. David stared at the screen, his face going pale as he recognized the financial records. Michael, this looks like embezzlement. Over $2 million in 8 months, I said quietly. All going to companies that didn't exist before Jessica started positioning herself for power. David sat back, the weight of what we discovered settling between us like a heavy stone. She's not just taking over the company. She's stealing from it, then planning to sell off the pieces to cover her tracks. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Stop digging, or you'll regret it. Some things are better left buried. I showed the message to David, whose face went even paler. She knows we're onto her. But what Jessica didn't realize was that threatening me had just transformed a potential whistleblower into someone with nothing left to lose. I'd already lost my job, my reputation, and 12 years of professional relationships. She'd pushed me into a corner, and cornered animals fight back. David, I said, pocketing my phone, how would you feel about making a call to the FBI? The FBI field office in downtown Indianapolis looked exactly like every crime show had taught me to expect: glass, steel, and the kind of fluorescent lighting that made everyone look guilty of something. Agent Patricia Moore sat across from me in interview room B, her gray hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, studying the photos on my phone with the intensity of someone who'd seen every financial crime imaginable. Mr. Torres, these bank records show systematic theft over 8 months, she said, scrolling through the evidence. But I need to understand your role in discovering this information. I explained how I'd found the files while helping with Jessica's transition, how the amounts seemed wrong, how the companies receiving payments appear to be shells. Agent Moore took notes, occasionally asking for clarification about Westfield's normal business practices. The timing of your termination is interesting, she said, looking up from her notepad. You discover evidence of embezzlement, and 3 days later you're fired. That suggests Ms. Westfield may have known you'd seen something. She sent me a threatening text yesterday, I said, showing her the message. Agent Moore photographed the screen with her phone. We'll need more than your testimony to build a case. Can you think of anyone inside the company who might cooperate with our investigation? David Chun, the CFO. He's been questioning the missing funds, but didn't know where they were going. Agent Moore made another note. We'll approach Mr. Chun today. In the meantime, I need you to promise me something crucial. You cannot contact anyone at Westfield Industries or discuss this investigation with anyone. Not your family, not former co-workers, nobody. I nodded, understanding the weight of what I'd set in motion. As I left the building, my phone rang. Robert Westfield's name appeared on the screen, and his voice sounded broken in a way I'd never heard before. Michael, I need to see you. Something terrible has happened. We met at the same diner where David and I had talked the day before. Robert looked like he'd aged a decade overnight, his usually perfect silver hair disheveled, his eyes red with exhaustion. She's locked me out, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Changed all the computer passwords, called security when I try to enter my own office. 40 years building that company, and my own daughter. He couldn't finish the sentence. I wanted to tell him about the FBI, about the evidence, about how justice was already in motion. But Agent Moore's warning echoed in my mind. Instead, I reached across the table and placed my hand on his shoulder. Robert, I promise you this isn't over. Sometimes the truth has a way of coming out when people least expect it. He looked up at me with hope mixed with desperation. You always were the most loyal person in that building. Michael, I should have fought harder for you. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Emergency board meeting moved to this afternoon. Jessica's accelerating everything. 3 hours later, I sat in my car across the street from Westfield Industries, watching black SUVs with government plates pull into the parking lot. Agent Moore had moved faster than I'd expected. Through the building's glass entrance, I could see Jessica in the lobby, gesturing wildly at what appeared to be federal agents, showing her official documents. My phone rang. David's voice was shaking with excitement and terror. Michael, the FBI just served search warrants. They're seizing computers, financial records, everything. Jessica's been screaming about wrongful persecution and demanding to call her lawyer. Where's Robert? In his office. Well, Jessica's office, trying to understand what's happening. The agents want to speak with him separately. I watched more agents enter the building, carrying boxes of equipment. Other employees gathered at windows, pointing and whispering. 12 years of working in that building, and I'd never imagined I'd be watching it from the outside as federal investigators expose corruption at its highest levels. David, what did you tell them? Everything. About the missing funds, the shell companies, the timeline of when you found the evidence versus when you were fired. They said it was exactly what they needed to establish criminal intent. Through my car window, I saw Jessica emerge from the building flanked by 2 agents. Even at this distance, I could see her confident demeanor had cracked. The woman who'd fired me with such casual cruelty now looked small and vulnerable, her expensive suit wrinkled, her perfectly styled hair falling loose around her shoulders. But what happened next surprised everyone. Robert Westfield walked out of the building under his own power. No agents escorting him, no handcuffs, no look of defeat. Instead, he moved with purpose toward Jessica, and even from across the street, I could see him speaking to her with an intensity I'd rarely witnessed. My phone rang again. This time, it was Agent Moore. "Mr. Torres, we need you to come back to the field office. There's been a development in the case that alters everything." "What kind of development?" "The kind that makes your evidence even more valuable than we initially thought. It turns out Ms. Westfield's theft was just the beginning. We've uncovered a conspiracy involving multiple companies and several million more dollars." I started my car, my hands trembling slightly. When I'd photographed those financial records 3 days ago, I thought I was documenting simple embezzlement. Now it seemed I'd stumbled into something much larger. "Agent Moore, does this mean Jessica's crimes were worse than we thought?" "Much worse." "And Mr. Torres? The board meeting she called for today? She was planning to complete the largest financial crime in Westfield Industries history. Your firing wasn't just about silencing you. It was about eliminating the one person who understood the company's systems well enough to stop her." As I drove toward downtown, another call came through. This time it was Sarah Martinez, our head of human resources, someone I'd worked with for 8 years. Her voice was panicked. "Michael, I know you're not supposed to be talking to anyone from the company, but I had a call. The FBI agents are asking questions about your termination, about whether there was proper documentation, about Jessica's access to financial systems." I told them the truth, that your firing came out of nowhere, no warnings, no performance issues. "Sarah, I appreciate you calling, but I can't discuss this right now." "Wait, before you hang up, they also asked about the West Division sale." "Michael, I saw the contracts Jessica prepared. She was going to sell 300 jobs worth of equipment and client relationships to a company called Pacific Solutions Group for half their actual value. When I looked up the company, guess who's listed as their primary consultant? My blood went cold. One of the California firms, the same address as 2 of them. Michael, she wasn't just stealing money. She was preparing to destroy the entire West Coast operation and funnel the proceeds to herself. I pulled into the FBI building's parking garage, my mind racing. Jessica's plan had been even more elaborate than I'd realized. Steal money through fake consulting fees, position herself to inherit control of the company, then liquidate the most valuable division at below-market prices to companies she secretly controlled. She would have walked away with millions while hundreds of families lost their livelihoods. Agent Moore met me in the lobby, her expression grim but determined. "Mr. Torres, we need to move quickly. Based on David Chin's testimony and your evidence, we've obtained warrants for Jessica Westfield's personal accounts. What we found changes the scope of this investigation entirely." She led me to a conference room where David sat across from another agent, surrounded by financial documents spread across a large table. David looked up when I entered, relief flooding his face. "Michael, thank God you're here. This is Agent Robert Sullivan from the Financial Crimes Unit. Tell him what you told me." Agent Sullivan, a tall man with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, gestured to the documents. "Mr. Torres, your evidence was the key that unlocked everything. Jessica Westfield has been running a sophisticated embezzlement scheme, but it goes far beyond Westfield Industries. She's been targeting multiple family-owned businesses across the Midwest, using the same pattern: gain insider access, siphon funds through fake companies, then position herself to acquire assets at below-market prices. I stare at the paper spread before us. Bank records, corporate filings, email communications, evidence of a criminal enterprise that had been operating for over 2 years. How many companies? I asked. 7 that we've identified so far. Combined theft of over $12 million. Your employer was going to be her biggest score, and her exit strategy. Agent Moore leaned forward. Mr. Torres, we need your help with one more thing. Tomorrow morning, we're going to arrest Jessica Westfield on federal charges. But we need someone who understands Westfield Industries operations to help us trace exactly how much money she stole and where it went. Would you be willing to work with our forensic accountants? I thought about Robert's broken voice on the phone, about the 300 employees who had no idea how close they'd come to losing everything, about 12 years of loyalty dismissed with cruel indifference. Agent Moore, I said, I'll do whatever it takes to make sure she pays for what she's done. At 7:23 a.m. the next morning, I watched through a one-way mirror as federal agents placed Jessica Westfield in handcuffs outside her luxury apartment complex. Even from the FBI surveillance van, I could see her face transform from sleepy confusion to absolute terror as Agent Moore read her the charges: conspiracy to commit wire fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, and racketeering. She's asking for her lawyer, Agent Sullivan said, adjusting his headset. Standard procedure. But Mr. Torres, what happens next is going to surprise everyone, including you. Before I could ask what he meant, my phone buzzed with an urgent call from David Shun. His voice was breathless with panic. Michael, you need to get to the office immediately. Robert collapsed in the parking lot 20 minutes ago. The paramedics are here, but he's asking for you specifically. My stomach dropped. Is he okay? Conscious, but they think it might be his heart. Michael, before they put him in the ambulance, he grabbed my arm and said something strange. He said, tell Michael the safe combination is Linda's birthday. He'll know what to do. Agent Moore looked at me with concern. Mr. Torres, we understand this is personal, but we need you to focus on the investigation. Agent Moore, Robert Westfield built that company with his bare hands. If he's trying to tell me something important enough to say from a stretcher, it might be crucial to your case. She considered this for a moment, then nodded. Agent Sullivan will accompany you, but this doesn't leave our sight. 30 minutes later, I stood in Robert's office, the same office where Jessica had fired me just 4 days earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me as Agent Sullivan watched me approach the wall safe hidden behind a painting of Robert's late wife, Linda. I entered her birthday, April 17, 1952. The safe opened with a soft click, revealing something that made my blood run cold. Stacks of documents, USB drives, and a handwritten letter addressed to me personally. With shaking hands, I pulled out the letter and read Robert's familiar handwriting. Michael, if you're reading this, then my worst fears about Jessica have come true. I've known for months that she was stealing from the company, but I needed proof before I could act. Every document in this safe contains evidence of her crimes, evidence I've been gathering secretly while pretending to be the foolish old man she thought she was manipulating. Agent Sullivan leaned over my shoulder, his eyes widening as he scanned the letter. Mr. Torres, keep reading. I couldn't trust anyone inside the company except you, but I needed Jessica to make a move that would expose her completely. Your firing wasn't just about her protecting herself. It was the final piece of evidence I needed to prove she was eliminating anyone who might discover her crimes. I recorded every conversation we had about the West Division sale, every threat she made, every lie she told the board. My hands trembled as I continued reading. Michael, I know this means you suffered unfairly, and I'll spend the rest of my life making that right. But your integrity and loyalty were the only things standing between Jessica and the destruction of everything I built. The USB drives contain recordings of her admitting to the thefts, planning the asset sales, and discussing how to frame other employees for her crimes. Agent Sullivan was already on his phone, calling for additional agents and forensic specialists. But I kept reading, needing to understand the full scope of what Robert had orchestrated. There's one more thing you need to know. Jessica isn't working alone. The California companies aren't just shells. They're connected to a larger organization that targets family businesses across the country. Jessica was recruited by them 2 years ago, specifically because she was Robert Westfield's daughter and could gain insider access. Your evidence didn't just expose her crimes. It uncovered a criminal network that's been operating for years. I set the letter down, my mind reeling. Robert hadn't been the helpless victim I thought he was. He'd been playing a dangerous game, using himself and his company as bait to expose not just his daughter's crimes, but an entire criminal organization. Agent Sullivan finished his call and turned to me. "Mr. Torres, this changes everything. We're not just dealing with embezzlement anymore. This is organized crime, conspiracy, fraud on a massive scale. And you, by discovering those financial records and getting fired for it, you gave us the key to bringing down the entire operation." My phone rang. It was David again, but this time his voice carried relief instead of panic. "Michael, Robert's stable. The doctors say it was stress-induced, not a heart attack. But he's asking to speak with you as soon as possible. He says he has something important to tell you about your future at the company." As I looked around Robert's office, surrounded by evidence of crimes that stretched far beyond what I'd initially discovered, I realized that Jessica's decision to fire me hadn't just been about protecting herself. It had been the final move in a game she never realized she was losing. But the biggest revelation was still coming, and it would transform everything I thought I knew about loyalty, justice, and the price of doing what's right. 2 hours later, I sat beside Robert's hospital bed, watching him sip water through a straw while federal agents positioned themselves discreetly around the room. His color had returned, and despite the medical equipment surrounding him, his eyes held a sharpness I hadn't seen in months. "Michael," he said, his voice stronger than I'd expected, "I owe you an explanation that's 40 years in the making." Before I could respond, Agent Moore entered the room, carrying a thick folder. "Mr. Westfield, the evidence from your safe has been processed. We now have enough to charge Jessica Westfield and 12 other individuals across 7 states with racketeering, conspiracy, and organized fraud totaling over $30 million. Robert nodded grimly. "Agent Moore, what I'm about to tell Michael will explain how this criminal network operates and why they targeted my company specifically." He turned back to me, his expression mixing pride with regret. "Michael, do you remember when I hired you 12 years ago? You thought it was because of your marketing skills, but the truth is more complicated. I've been investigating suspicious activities in our industry for years. Family businesses being systematically targeted, owners being manipulated by their own children, assets being stripped and sold to the same group of California companies. My mind raced as pieces began clicking into place. You hired me because you suspected something was going to happen to Westfield Industries. I hired you because I needed someone inside the company who had integrity, someone who would notice financial irregularities and couldn't be bought or intimidated. When Jessica started showing interest in the business 2 years ago, I knew they'd recruited her. Everything she did, the business school education, the move to Miami, the sudden desire to modernize the company, it all followed the same pattern I'd seen at other targeted businesses. Agent Moore leaned forward. "Mr. Westfield, are you saying you've been running an undercover operation for years?" Robert actually smiled. "Agent Moore, I'm a 72-year-old man who built air conditioning systems for a living. But when criminals threaten your life's work and manipulate your own child into becoming their weapon, you learn to fight back with whatever tools you have." He reached for my hand. "Michael, your firing was the final piece of evidence we needed. It proved Jessica was eliminating threats, which established criminal intent. Your discovery of the financial records provided the paper trail. And your decision to contact the FBI instead of confronting Jessica directly saved not just Westfield Industries, but potentially dozens of other family businesses." Agent Sullivan entered the room, his face serious. "Gentlemen, we've just arrested 4 more individuals in California, and we've frozen accounts containing over $20 million in stolen assets. Mr. Torres, your photographs and testimony were the foundation that made all of this possible." I felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had unfolded. "Robert, what happens now? To the company, to the employees, to everything you built?" Robert's eyes brightened. "That's the best part, Michael. With Jessica's stolen money recovered and the criminal network exposed, Westfield Industries is stronger than ever. The West division that she tried to sell? Those contracts are now worth double what they were before, and we have no debt because we're getting back every penny she stole. He paused, studying my face. Michael, I want you to come back. Not as head of marketing, but as chief operating officer. Equal partnership in running the company, with a salary that reflects your true value and a guarantee that you'll never again have to worry about job security. Agent Moore interrupted gently. Mr. Torres, there's something else you should know. The FBI is recommending you for a Civilian Service Award. Your actions didn't just solve one case. They dismantled a criminal organization that was targeting family businesses across the entire Midwest. I looked around the hospital room, thinking about how this all started with a humiliating firing just 5 days ago. Jessica had thought she was eliminating a threat, but instead she'd activated the very person who would bring down her entire criminal network. Robert, I said finally, I accept your offer, but I have one condition. Name it. We establish an employee protection fund, using part of the recovered money. Any worker who gets fired unfairly, any family that faces hardship because of corporate greed, they get support while they fight back. Robert's smile was the brightest I'd seen since before his retirement. Michael, that's exactly why I knew you were the right person for this job 12 years ago. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Jessica just pled guilty to avoid trial. Full restitution, 10 years federal prison. It's over. As I sat in that hospital room, surrounded by the evidence of justice served and friendship restored, I realized that sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you turns out to be the exact catalyst needed to expose the truth. Jessica Westfield had fired me thinking she was protecting her criminal empire. Instead, she just handed the FBI their star witness and given me the motivation to see justice done. The company she'd tried to destroy was now stronger than ever, and I was no longer just an employee. I was a partner in building something better.